Hi there. I did kind of write a little blurb that I kind of wanted to just share with you in the crowd. I've been using Linux a little bit more and more these days. I've been trying to grow in that direction just before I start reading it, as far as my stance and everything is concerned about the computer space. And this is going to deal with, computing as a little bit of a rant. But, the thing is that my personal slant about all this is that I use both Microsoft Windows and Linux. I don't. I see. For me, I always wonder the question, why not both? Mentally, and you know, that's always been a question that has hung over my head when it came to technology. I mean, I see these wars that take place and develop between two technologies, and I'm like, why do we even need to have a war between us? Isn't there enough room for both of us? But I've fallen more and more and more in love with Linux over time, and I think that part of it is just that I despise the way that very little seems to be done with in that basically most people like in the Linux community seem to rant and rave about the fact that you have to learn the command line to actually use Linux. But for me, that's one of the best parts about the fucking operating system when it comes to Linux. I mean, how should I put this in terms that are like much more human? What's happened in the tech space for a long time when it came to software developers and everything seems to have been that the mentality among software developers has been, does our software run slowly? Oh well, fuck it. In a few years computers will be faster. Let's just kick the can down the road and wait for computers to speed up so that our stuff can actually work. Then and in the old days it was like devices like if you go back and you look at old devices, it's really remarkable what they were able to squeeze out of them, in terms of like how few resources they actually had behind, backing all that stuff up. A lot of our older gaming consoles, especially the handheld small ones, they might not have graphics that look anything like the modern world, but if you consider like what it is that was actually able the hardware that was actually supporting all of it, it's remarkable, just what they were able to squeeze out of that hardware, you know perspective wise. And it becomes really frustrating, from an end user perspective, because it doesn't really matter ultimately if how other people feel about it or their perspective, as far as this one's concerned. But for me individually, and you're free to disagree with me if you want, but it does feel very strongly that to like I'm not the biggest fan of a GUI, like I guess you could say that I don't feel like it's an either or question. It's again, it's a question of both. Why not both? But when it comes to using a graphical user interface versus the command line interface, you're not limited to one tool, one or the other. But where it's possible to do something over the command line, I would prefer to do it over the command line, for the simple fact that when it runs in the command line, like it will make the least use of RAM. It will make the least use of it will run through the actual process that it does and execute much faster than it would otherwise if it had to deal with all those other components that it needed to keep the graphics on the screen and keep processing all that data. It becomes very sleek and efficient and lightweight when it's run over the command line. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be any of those things. What I prioritize the most is just ruthless efficiency when it comes to computing. I mean, I want it to be fast, and no matter how fast it is, I want it to be faster. Basically, like there's no limit on that. So it's not like there's going to be a point in which there's it's perfect. Like I view it sort of like as a performance, as something that it's sort of like a goal to pursue perfection and to shoot for, but realize that you're never going to actually reach things running like instantaneously. But the faster that you can make things, the better, basically. And that goes on for an infinite regression, basically, or an infinite loop. So not an infinite loop, but for ever and ever and ever, and an infinite line forward going on into infinity. So no matter how much faster it gets, it's there. You still want to be even faster. You know, and because of that, and because of that frustration, when it comes to computing, it's like, and I'm obviously looking at my phone because I'm sort of remarkable. I find it remarkable, the miniaturization of everything. I do. I mean, it is sort of remarkable to me that what they say about this device is that it's got more power in it than we used in the spaceship to send people to Mars. But nobody's sending people to Mars with a fucking phone anymore. And I think that what happened and is very unfortunate, and that's just how I feel about it. Other people are free to disagree, but what happens in computing, like I said, was that developers kind of developed this mentality of putting performance in the back seat to just getting something put together and able to run, as quickly as possible. And so, rapid development became, the goal, instead of efficient development and efficient performance. And so, my slant is all the way towards performance. And so it's like, that's why I prefer things on the command line, because I do know that it will make it will use the least amount of RAM possible. It'll probably run through whatever process it's running quicker than it would otherwise. And so it's pretty much always better that all you have is a simple prompt. You know what I mean, on the computer, versus having to deal with having to deal with a GUI to run things, because the GUI is always going to be slower. And so, learning and growing on using the command line more and more efficiently was sort of my goal. And I'm afraid that if in the old days, I would have been content to just not say anything at all. But I'm afraid that my silence, is only contributing to the problem where all this stuff is concerned. And so, because of that, and because of the fact, because everybody else is complaining and screeching very loudly about, wanting to do things on the GUI, and it's the same way that I would screech now about how I like turn-based combat in RPGs. And the only reason to do that at this point is because so many other voices are saying the exact opposite. you know and I feel like, if I don't raise my voice, people won't know to include me, and my concerns and things, and they won't know that there are people out there that actually do like these things, and are, that do like turn-based games enough to shell out money on them, turn-based RPGs, like, they won't know that we're part of that market. And Octopath Traveler had over 1 million sales, and they're making a sequel for it now, thankfully. you know that's really good news and great news. I can't wait to fucking play it. But my mentality doesn't hail from this place, and I think that part of it has been shaped by, when I showed you guys this the other day, like this particular cartridge. I i don't kind of I really don't very much so hail from the perspective as a gamer that, that with the best graphics humanly possible is necessarily the best game possible. you know for me, it's very much so able to have you're able to have crummy graphics, and if you make the game engaging and enough, and entertaining enough to play through, then I really don't care all that much about the quality of the graphics, and if it can do ray tracing and all that other stuff and all those other goodies. I mean, it's nice to look at. It's nice to see that graphics are chugging along, but I just don't think that they should be the focus. I think gameplay and storytelling ought to be the focus of an RPG, rather than having the best damn graphics humanly possible. And to that end, I mean, well into the modern era. It's 2022 at this point, and I still play this multi-user dungeon occasionally called a Chia. Like, I still log in and play and interact with it, where all it is text on the screen. You know, and the thing is that I've found that in those games that they can often have things that you can't have in graphical games. I mean, when I was a paying Simultronics customer playing Dragon Realms and playing Gemstone, they literally, like, the role playing experiences were out of this world compared to anything that did have was more modern at the time. They were existing as a competition to more modern products at the time that I was playing them, and we all knew that there were more, you know graphical games out there that you were not text based, and it was the fucking post EverQuest era where we were already moving into World of Warcraft time. By that point, we knew it was out there why we were playing these text based games. And the thing about all of it, was that we were having this very intense role playing experience where it was like, the cities could actually be invaded. They could actually literally write a storyline, a script or a storyline where the city was taken by the enemy forces and sits with them for quite a while. Where if you're not a worshiper of the dark side of the gods, that you're going to get attacked randomly by a bunch of fuckwits inside the city while you travel inside of it. I mean, the game was that kind of way. It was that kind of intensity that was going on in the whole thing, and you had invasions of the cities that the people that were in them had to deal with and defend the cities against, and like, there were enemy armies that could be sent to march on cities and everything. It was insane, and it was like you could throw something like this together, all at once, and put together this together over, you know, a 4 hour, session where you write this entire and develop this whole thing on the fly, or not on the fly, but you put it all together within a couple of hours and then throw it at your players when they're not even expecting it all at once, as a surprise that you just throw at them, in the middle of nothing. And before long, people start figuring out what's going on in the cities and they start trying to organize a response to it. Like this was Gemstone, this was Dragon Realms to a huge extent, and what the experience was like playing the two of them. And it was at the kind of intensity level that I've just never been able to experience inside anything more modern as far as that stuff is concerned. And so it's like I have nostalgia that's literally like, you've got your nostalgia. Well, I think that mine is so much better than yours, as far as that stuff is concerned, because I was playing this obscure stuff that very few people had ever fucking heard of, but the quality of it was just out of this fucking world. Even though it was done, over purely, a text based experience, it was insane. Like, I still reel from all the stuff that I was putting up with and was willing to endure for that sort of thing and for that sort of experience. And you know, so as far as I'm concerned, gameplay and storytelling should be the real focus of the software when it comes to an RPG. And the other thing is just that computing, over the command line is always a lot quicker, and it executes a lot quicker, and it makes less use of RAM. Random access memory, it will use less of that, and so because of that, the overhang on your system is lower, so that you can devote those resources to whatever you want to devote them to. For me right now, with the Linux box that I've built, it's getting through Hashcat at the moment to engage in a little bit of a wink wink, at the moment, because I'm trying to develop a little bit of a curiosity into you know uh, learning a bit about cybersecurity. Basically, I'm doing that, and I'm learning how it's done and all the tricks about how you know you go about doing that stuff. And like, so that's me, and that's what I'm up to, and that's how I feel about everything. And I like Linux. I like it. I'm obviously using Windows at the moment, with the webcamera.io website to put this together as a video as my recorder. That's what I use to put it together and to talk to you guys from here. But yeah, I've got I've got a very large preference for doing anything that it is possible to do over the command line, especially because if I learn a little bit about coding and everything, I can extend, the command line, utilities to do even more, and, actually have greater flexibility and control over them, and what's going on in that direction. And I think that, like, we had a lot, like I was trying to indicate before, of, the kind of developers when I was growing up, on America Online and VB and its private chat room. These guys would develop password crackers, but, the old, like, the old experience of the password cracker is that it would load a copy of the AOL client itself, and control the AOL client by robot and try passwords one by one by one. But eventually, what emerged as far as a password cracker was that it wouldn't even load the AOL client. It just had reverse engineered the protocol, the communications protocol between AOL and the password cracker, and it was able to have a third party client that was completely unofficial, that was communicating with their servers to try to, break passwords. And it had a huge exponential explosion in performance and the number of queries that it was able to try as a result of changing over to that way of doing things. And, you know I've been using computers now for, like, what, 20, 25, years now, basically. Um, but yeah, I think that the trend towards ignoring performance has been a fucking cancer that should be basically excised with extreme prejudice and burned out with cleansing fire.